Maria, her usual subservient demeanor completely shed, greeted Victor with a possessive embrace, a cruel smile twisting her lips. Elias watched them on the monitors, their hushed conversation filled with a sickening mix of triumph and malice. They spoke of finalizing the arrangements, of sending the children away to a place where they would be properly managed, their words dripping with a chilling disregard for Lily's and Leo's well-being. Victor, with a predatory gleam in his eyes, began to discuss the next steps, the legal documents he had forged, the swift transfer of assets they planned to execute. Elias's blood ran cold as he heard Maria's voice, a venomous hiss, suggesting they remove any lingering sentimental attachments, a chilling euphemism for disposing of his wife's cherished belongings, symbols of a love they sought to erase. The children, oblivious to the sinister plans unfolding around them, were playing quietly in Lily's room, their innocent laughter, a stark contrast to the darkness that permeated the air below. Elias watched them through the camera feed, a fierce, protective love surging through him, solidifying his resolve. He waited, allowing their depraved conversation to fully unfold, to incriminate themselves beyond any doubt. Maria, emboldened by Victor's presence and Elias's supposed absence, grew increasingly arrogant, her true nature fully exposed. She boasted about how easily she had manipulated Elias, how his grief had made him blind, how she had been slowly poisoning the children's minds, turning them against their own father. Victor chuckled, a low guttural sound praising her cunning, their shared contempt for Elias and his family palpable. As Maria and Victor moved towards the children's rooms, a twisted sense of urgency in their steps, Elias knew his moment had arrived. He heard Maria instructing Victor to gather the little ones, her voice a chilling echo of a mother's command, but laced with a malevolent intent. Victor, with a cruel smirk, began to ascend the grand staircase, his shadow stretching long and menacing on the polished marble. Elias emerged from his hiding place, his presence sudden and commanding. A force of nature unleashed. His voice, usually calm and measured, boomed through the silent mansion, cutting through the air like a sword. "Maria!" "Victor!" The sound echoed, reverberating through the vast halls, each syllable laden with a righteous fury that made the very foundations of the house tremble. Maria and Victor froze, their bodies stiffening, their faces draining of color as they spun around, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Maria's jaw dropped, her carefully constructed facade shattering into 1,000 pieces, revealing the raw, ugly fear beneath. Victor, momentarily stunned, recovered quickly, his hand instinctively reaching for something hidden beneath his jacket, but Elias was faster. With a swift, powerful movement, he stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Maria's, a silent promise of retribution in their depths. The millionaire burst in was not just a physical entrance. It was the re-emergence of a father's unwavering love, a husband's legacy, and a man's unyielding commitment to justice. The mansion, once a stage for their deceit, was now the arena for their reckoning. Maria's face, now devoid of all pretense, was a twisted canvas of raw terror and sputtering rage. Her breath hitched, a strangled gasp escaping her lips as Victor, his hand still fumbling beneath his jacket for whatever weapon he sought, found himself paralyzed by the sheer force of Elias's presence. The air in the grand hall thickened, charged with the palpable weight of shattered deceit and righteous fury. Elias stood at the base of the staircase, a sentinel of justice, his gaze unwavering, piercing through Maria's facade as if it were made of glass. He saw not the subservient housekeeper, but the monster who had tormented his children, the architect of a scheme that sought to dismantle his family, and the sight solidified his resolve, hardening his heart against any flicker of pity. "Do not take another step towards those children," Elias commanded, his voice a low rumble that resonated with an unshakable authority, a stark warning that brooked no argument. Victor, his eyes darting frantically between Elias and the grand entrance, seemed to weigh his options, a flicker of desperate aggression in his gaze. But the sheer overwhelming power emanating from Elias, coupled with the sudden, almost imperceptible movement of two large, discreetly placed security personnel emerging from the shadows near the entrance, made him reconsider. His hand slowly dropped from his jacket, his body tensing, recognizing the futility of resistance. Maria, however, found a twisted courage in her desperation, her fear transforming into a venomous defiance. "What are you talking about, Mr. Thorne?" she stammered, her voice shrill, attempting to regain her composure, to rebuild the shattered fragments of her innocent facade. "I was merely taking the children to bed. They need their rest. You know how difficult they can be without their mother's gentle touch." Her words, once so effective in playing on Elias's grief, now rang hollow, dripping with a sickening insincerity that only fueled his contempt. He watched her carefully, noting the way her eyes darted towards Victor, a silent plea for corroboration, a desperate attempt to maintain their shared lie. But the game was over, the curtain drawn back, revealing the ugly truth beneath. "Don't insult my intelligence," Maria, Elias retorted, his voice chillingly calm, a stark contrast to the storm raging within him. "I know everything. Every cruel word, every hidden bruise, every stolen moment of my children's innocence. I know about your accomplice, Victor, and your elaborate scheme to steal my family's legacy, to cast out my children and claim what you believe is rightfully yours." As he spoke, a tablet materialized in his hand, its screen displaying a montage of damning images. Maria rough-handling Leo, Maria whispering threats to Lily, Maria and Victor discussing their plot in hushed, venomous tones. The visual evidence was irrefutable, a silent, powerful indictment that left no room for denial. Maria's eyes widened, her face contorting in a grotesque mask of shock and betrayal as she saw the footage. Her own words and actions laid bare for all to see. The carefully constructed wall of her deceit crumbled completely, replaced by a raw, unadulterated fury. You set me up," she shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical crescendo that echoed through the silent mansion, a desperate, animalistic cry of a trapped predator. "You think you're so clever, don't you? With your money, your power, but you were nothing, a shell of a man lost in your grief. I did everything for you, for those ungrateful children. They needed a mother, a strong hand, and you were too weak to give it to them." Her words poured out, a torrent of long-suppressed resentment and bitterness, revealing the true depth of her twisted motivations. Victor, seeing the game was truly up, made a desperate lunge towards the front door, hoping to make a break for it. But the two security personnel, who had been silently observing the unfolding drama, moved with professional swiftness, intercepting him before he could even reach the threshold. They subdued him with practiced ease, their movements efficient and silent, securing his hands behind his back. Maria, witnessing Victor's capture, let out another guttural scream, her eyes blazing with a wild, uncontrollable rage. "You will regret this, Elias Thorne. You will regret the day you ever crossed me," she spat, her voice laced with a venom that promised eternal retribution, her humanity completely stripped away, revealing the monstrous core of her being. At that very moment, the front door, which Victor had hoped to breach, swung open, revealing a team of uniformed police officers, their faces grim and determined, followed by Elias's legal counsel, a stern-faced woman named Eleanor Vance, known for her unwavering pursuit of justice. Elias had orchestrated this moment meticulously, ensuring that every angle was covered, every escape route blocked, every piece of evidence ready to be presented. The sound of official footsteps, the glint of badges, and Eleanor's calm, authoritative voice, "Maria Rodriguez and Victor Moreau, you are under arrest," brought a chilling finality to the scene. The mansion, once a sanctuary, then a cage of fear, was now an arena where truth had finally triumphed over deceit, and justice was about to be served, not with violence, but with the undeniable weight of evidence and the unyielding strength of a father's love. 2 years later, the Grand Mansion, once a silent monument to sorrow and fear, now vibrated with the joyous symphony of a family truly reborn. The sterile scent of absence had been replaced by the comforting aromas of home-cooked meals and the sweet fragrance of freshly cut flowers, a testament to Elias's unwavering dedication to cultivating a new beginning. Elias, no longer a phantom in his own home, moved with an easy grace, his laughter echoing freely as he chased Lily and Leo through the sun-drenched gardens, their innocent giggles painting vibrant strokes across the canvas of his once grief-stricken heart. The armor of his professional life had been shed, revealing a father fully present, his eyes alight with an unconditional love that had finally found its true expression. Maria and Victor, their heinous crimes fully exposed by Elias's meticulous evidence and the children's brave testimonies, faced the full weight of justice, their schemes unraveled and their cruelty punished, ensuring they could never again inflict pain upon innocent hearts. Lily, now a bright-eyed 8-year-old, her spirit blossoming under the warmth of her father's affection, would spend hours beside Elias, planting vibrant flowers in the sprawling garden, their small hands covered in rich, fertile earth. She spoke openly, her voice clear and unafraid, sharing her day's adventures and her dreams, her fears having receded into a distant, forgotten shadow. Leo, a boisterous 3-year-old, now reached for Elias with unhesitating trust, his tiny arms wrapping around his father's neck in spontaneous, bone-crushing hugs, his joyful cries a constant melody in the once silent halls. The scars of their past were still present, subtle reminders of a darkness overcome, but they were fading, replaced by the vibrant hues of security, affection, and the steadfast presence of a loving father. Elias had sought the best therapists, ensuring his children had every tool to heal. And he himself had embarked on a journey of self-discovery, learning to balance his professional life with the paramount importance of his family. Dinner times were no longer silent, somber affairs but lively celebrations, filled with stories and shared dreams, the aroma of home-cooked meals replacing the sterile scent of absence. Elias would recount humorous anecdotes from his day, while Lily eagerly described her latest drawing or a new game she invented, and Leo, with his limited but expressive vocabulary, would add his own delightful contributions, often eliciting peals of laughter from his father and sister. The mansion, once a cold monument to grief, had been transformed into a sanctuary of warmth and belonging, its walls now echoing with the joyous sounds of a family united, their bond forged stronger by the trials they had faced and the truth that had set them free. Elias often found himself simply watching them, a profound sense of peace settling over him, knowing that the greatest wealth he possessed was not his empire, but the love that bloomed so freely within his home. The journey had been arduous, fraught with despair and the chilling weight of betrayal, but Elias had emerged from the shadows of his own grief, guided by the fierce, protective love for his children. He had learned that true strength lay not in material wealth, but in the courage to confront evil, the unwavering commitment to truth, and the boundless power of a parent's unconditional love. The story of Elias Thorne, the millionaire who burst in to save his children, became a quiet legend, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest corners of human cruelty, the light of love and justice will always prevail. What would you do to protect an innocent child from unseen dangers? How far would your love stretch to rebuild a shattered world and mend broken spirits? Share your thoughts, for in every act of courage, in every embrace of truth, we find the strength to nurture and protect the most vulnerable among us. Remember, the seeds of kindness, sown with unwavering love and unyielding courage, always blossom into a garden of enduring hope and justice. His wife's memory, once a source of paralyzing grief, now became a guiding light. He remembered her meticulous nature, her habit of leaving notes and journals, her deep love for their children. He began to search, driven by an instinct that his beloved had left him a message, a warning from beyond her departure. In the hidden compartment of her old writing desk, tucked away beneath layers of sentimental letters and dried flowers, he found it, a small, delicately folded envelope, addressed to him in her elegant script. His hands trembled as he opened it, the paper brittle with age, the scent of her favorite lavender lingering faintly. This was not a letter written in her final days, but one penned years earlier, a testament to her foresight, her unwavering love, and perhaps her unspoken fears. The words within promised to unveil truths far more complex and disturbing than he could have ever imagined. A legacy of her protective spirit reaching out from the past to guide him in his darkest hour. The letter, penned in elegant flowing script, was not a direct accusation, but a mother's premonition, a wife's deep, unsettling concern for her family's future, should she no longer be there. His beloved had written of Maria not with malice, but with an astute observation that now chilled Elias to the bone. She had noted Maria's unnerving possessiveness over the children, a subtle shift in her demeanor when she thought no one was watching, a fleeting, almost imperceptible resentment in her eyes whenever Elias's wife praised Lily's natural artistic talent or Leo's robust health. The letter spoke of Maria's exaggerated displays of affection, almost performative, and the way she would sometimes gently yet firmly dissuade the children from seeking comfort from their mother, subtly asserting her own presence. It was a mosaic of small disquieting details that, when viewed through the lens of Elias's current suspicions, formed a terrifying portrait of a woman whose devotion was a carefully constructed facade, designed to conceal a far darker intent. His wife had expressed a profound unease, a mother's instinct telling her that Maria harbored a deep-seated desire for something more than just employment, a hunger for control that felt predatory. Elias reread the letter, his fingers tracing his wife's familiar handwriting, a silent conversation across the chasm of time and loss. A wave of profound regret washed over him, a crushing realization of his own blindness, his self-imposed emotional exile after her departure. He had been so consumed by his grief, so desperate for someone to shoulder the burden of daily life, that he had overlooked the very warnings his wife had carefully laid out for him. The guilt was a physical ache in his chest, a painful counterpoint to the fierce protective love that now surged through him. He pictured Lily's trembling form, Leo's tiny rash-covered arm, and the pieces of Maria's insidious puzzle began to click into place with horrifying clarity. The locked doors, the hushed cries, the sudden, unnatural silence that would descend upon the nursery when Maria was present, all of it now made a terrible, undeniable sense. His wife's wisdom, her unwavering love had reached out from the past, a beacon guiding him through the fog of his own sorrow and Maria's deception. Armed with this renewed perspective, Elias's observations intensified, sharpening with a purpose he hadn't known since his early days building his empire. He no longer saw Maria as the devoted housekeeper, but as an adversary, a wolf in sheep's clothing whose every movement, every word, was now scrutinized for hidden meaning. He noticed how Maria would subtly manipulate Lily's emotions, praising her for being a good, quiet girl when Elias was around, but a moment later, her voice would drop to a low, menacing whisper, chastising Lily for a minor infraction, a subtle form of emotional conditioning designed to instill fear and obedience. He saw Maria confiscating Lily's favorite storybooks, claiming they were too messy, only to find them later tucked away in Maria's own room. The children's meals, once varied and nutritious, had become bland and repetitive, often consisting of foods Lily disliked, a quiet form of control Maria exerted over their small lives. Maria, in turn, seemed to sense the shift in Elias's demeanor, a subtle tightening of his jaw, a new intensity in his gaze that she couldn't quite decipher. Her practiced smile became a little too wide, her deference a little too pronounced, almost a caricature of her former self. She began to subtly undermine Elias's authority, telling Lily, "Papa is very busy, dear. He doesn't have time for silly games," whenever Lily would try to engage him in play. She would subtly dismiss Leo's cries as mere fussiness, discouraging Elias from comforting his son, attempting to create a wedge between them. One evening, Elias overheard Maria on the phone speaking in hushed, urgent tones, her voice laced with a venomous resentment he had never heard before. She spoke of the old woman's will and what was rightfully hers, a cryptic conversation that sent a fresh wave of alarm through Elias, connecting to his wife's earlier concerns about Maria's true motivations. He began to search the house more thoroughly, not just for clues relating to the children, but for anything that might shed light on Maria's background or her true intentions. He meticulously went through his wife's old financial records, her personal correspondence, anything that might reveal a connection to Maria beyond her role as a housekeeper. He recalled a distant relative of his wife, an elderly aunt who had recently passed, leaving a substantial inheritance. His wife had been the executor of the will, and Elias remembered Maria mentioning a casual acquaintance with the aunt years ago. A chilling possibility began to form in his mind, a connection between Maria's presence in his home and the inheritance, a motive far more insidious than mere neglect. The letter had not only revealed Maria's true character, but had also ignited a spark of suspicion regarding her deeper, hidden agenda, a web of deceit that seemed to stretch further than he had initially imagined, hinting at a calculated plan, not just a spontaneous act of cruelty. The revelation about his wife's aunt, a woman known for her immense wealth and her somewhat eccentric, solitary life, gnawed at Elias. He remembered the quiet legal proceedings, the reading of the will where his wife, as executor, had handled everything with her usual meticulous grace. Now, with the chilling words of his wife's letter echoing in his mind, and Maria's hushed phone call about the old woman's will, a sinister pattern began to emerge. He delved into the archives of his personal office, a space he had avoided since his wife's departure, pulling out dusty legal documents, bank statements, and correspondence related to the aunt's estate. The more he read, the more a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. There were significant discrepancies, large sums designated for various charities and distant relatives that seemed to have vanished, or at least their distribution was unaccounted for in the final ledger Elias now held. A specific clause, granting a substantial sum to a long-time caregiver who had provided comfort in the aunt's final years, caught his eye. His wife had mentioned this caregiver in passing, a kindly, unassuming woman named Elena, not Maria. Elias's suspicion crystallized into certainty. He cross-referenced dates, names, and addresses, a meticulous process that mirrored his corporate takeovers, but this time the stakes were infinitely higher. He discovered that Maria, under a subtly altered name, had indeed worked for his wife's aunt for a brief period, but had been dismissed months before the aunt's passing due to unprofessional conduct and attempts to manipulate the elderly woman. The true caregiver, Eleanor, had been replaced by Maria's fabricated claims, and the sum intended for Elena had been diverted into an offshore account, one that Maria had discreetly opened. The sheer audacity of the deception, the calculated cruelty of it, sent a cold wave of shock through Elias. Maria hadn't just been an opportunistic housekeeper, she was a predator, systematically dismantling lives for personal gain, and his children were her next most vulnerable targets. She had insinuated herself into his grief-stricken home, not out of care but out of a meticulously planned scheme, seeing his family's vulnerability as a golden opportunity to secure her ill-gotten gains, and perhaps even more. The nights became a silent vigil for Elias. He installed hidden cameras, tiny lenses strategically placed in the children's rooms, the nursery and key areas of the mansion, connecting them to a secure feed on his tablet. He barely slept, watching, waiting, every shadow a potential threat, every muffled sound a confirmation of his worst fears. The footage was damning. He saw Maria, once Elias had retired for the night, transform. Her soft voice hardened, her movements became sharper, less gentle. He witnessed her roughly pulling Lily's hair when the child refused a meal, heard her sharp, cutting words delivered in a low whisper, threatening to take away Lily's beloved stuffed rabbit if she didn't obey. He saw her leaving Leo in his crib for extended periods, ignoring his cries, sometimes even placing a pillow over his head, a terrifying glimpse of neglect that made Elias's blood run cold. The most chilling discovery was a series of late-night phone calls Maria made, not just about the inheritance, but about securing full custody and removing obstacles. The identity of the voice on the other end remained elusive, but the conversation was clear. Maria had a male accomplice, a partner in her vile scheme, and their plan was far more sinister than Elias had ever imagined, extending beyond mere financial gain to the complete usurpation of his family. During the day, Elias maintained a facade of normalcy, a silent hunter observing his prey. He made a conscious effort to spend more time with Lily and Leo, showering them with the affection he had withheld for too long. He read stories to Lily, his voice a comforting balm against the shadows Maria had cast. He held Leo close, feeling the warmth of his tiny body, rocking him gently, singing lullabies that his wife used to sing. Lily, initially withdrawn and fearful, slowly began to open up, her small hand finding his, her eyes once filled with terror, now reflecting a glimmer of trust. One afternoon, while they were drawing together, Lily whispered, "Maria says you don't love us. Papa, she says you only care about your work." The words were a dagger to Elias's heart, a painful confirmation of Maria's insidious manipulation, designed to sever the bond between him and his children, to isolate them further. He looked into Lily's innocent eyes, stroking her hair, and said, "That's not true, my brave girl. Papa loves you and Leo more than anything in the world, more than all the stars in the sky." His reconnection with his children was not just about comfort. It was also about gathering evidence. He gently encouraged Lily to draw what she felt, and her crayons, once depicting happy families, now showed dark, shadowy figures with angry faces, always with a distinct bun. He noticed the children's reluctance to eat certain foods that Maria insisted they consume, and he began to suspect she was deliberately creating a hostile environment, perhaps even subtly poisoning them to make them appear sickly or difficult. He found a small hidden diary belonging to Lily, filled with childish scrawls detailing Maria's cruel words, her threats, and her strange insistence on keeping the children away from the outside world. Each piece of evidence, painstakingly collected, strengthened his resolve, transforming his grief into a formidable force of righteous anger. He was no longer just a father in mourning. He was a protector, a warrior for his children, ready to dismantle Maria's reign of terror piece by agonizing piece, armed with truth, courage, and an unyielding, unconditional love that had finally awakened from its long slumber. The mansion, once a tomb of his sorrow, was now a battleground, and Elias was ready to fight for his family's future. No matter the cost, Maria, the housekeeper, felt the subtle shift in the mansion's atmosphere, a tightening of the air around her, a constant, unnerving scrutiny in Elias's usually distant gaze. Her carefully constructed facade, once impenetrable, now felt brittle, threatening to crack under the weight of his renewed presence. She redoubled her efforts to control the children, her whispers to Lily becoming more frequent, laced with thinly veiled threats about what would happen if she dared to speak of Maria's special rules to her father. Lily's artwork, once a vibrant explosion of color, grew increasingly muted, filled with dark, scribbled figures that Maria would quickly snatch away, admonishing the child for her morbid imagination. Leo, too, seemed to shrink from Maria's touch, his tiny cries escalating into desperate wails whenever she approached, a primal fear that Maria tried to dismiss as mere fussiness, but which now echoed with a chilling truth in Elias's ears. Maria's movements became more erratic, her smiles more strained, a desperate dance to maintain her illusion of devotion, while her true nature simmered just beneath the surface. Threatening to boil over, the hidden cameras, silent sentinels in the shadows, painted a horrifying picture for Elias. He watched Maria, in the quiet hours of the night, when she believed herself unobserved, unleash the full extent of her cruelty. He saw her deliberately withholding Lily's favorite blanket, leaving the child shivering and tearful in the dark. He witnessed her rough handling of Leo, her hands gripping his tiny arm far too tightly, her face contorted in a sneer as she ignored his desperate whimpers. The most damning footage, however, captured Maria's late-night calls, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss as she discussed the plan with her unseen accomplice. She spoke of hastening the process, of making the children disappear from Elias's life, of securing not just the inheritance, but full control over the estate, a twisted vision of a new family where she and her partner would reign supreme. The accomplice's voice, though muffled, was distinctly male, calm and calculating, a sinister counterpoint to Maria's frantic resentment, confirming Elias's growing fear that this was a carefully orchestrated plot. Not just a desperate act, Elias, consumed by a righteous fury, felt the weight of his wife's premonition pressing down on him, a heavy mantle of responsibility and regret. He had been so lost in his own sorrow, so blinded by the convenient comfort Maria offered, that he had allowed this darkness to fester in the heart of his home. His wife, in her infinite wisdom and boundless love, had seen through the facade, had left him the breadcrumbs of truth, and now it was his turn to act, to honor her memory by protecting the precious lives she had entrusted to him. The guilt was a constant companion, a sharp reminder of his past neglect, but it also fueled his resolve, sharpening his focus, transforming him from a grieving widower into a fierce guardian. He knew he could not confront Maria without a full, indisputable arsenal of evidence, for her cunning was as vast as her cruelty, and he would not allow her any chance to escape the justice she so richly deserved. One evening, as Maria attempted to usher Lily away from Elias, claiming it was time for her special quiet time, Elias gently but firmly intervened. "Lily is fine, Maria," he said, his voice calm, yet resonating with an unshakable authority that made Maria flinch. "She will stay with me tonight." Maria's eyes, usually deferential, flickered with a raw, undisguised resentment, a brief, terrifying glimpse of the monster lurking beneath her skin. Her smile faltered, her hands clenched imperceptibly, but she merely nodded, her voice tight. "As you wish, Mr. Thorne." The small victory, however, was significant. It was a clear declaration of his reasserted control, a signal that her reign of terror was drawing to a close, and Maria, for all her cunning, understood the unspoken challenge, her paranoia visibly escalating in the days that followed. The accomplice, a figure Elias had only heard as a disembodied voice on Maria's late-night calls, began to make his presence subtly known. Elias noticed new unfamiliar tire tracks on the long winding driveway in the early hours of the morning, always before Maria rose. He found a strange, expensive cigar butt in the garden, a brand he knew Maria would never smoke. The most chilling confirmation came when a small ornate locket, one Elias recognized as belonging to his wife's deceased aunt, mysteriously disappeared from a locked display case in the drawing room, only to reappear in a security camera feed, being slipped into Maria's pocket by a shadowy male figure who moved with an unsettling familiarity through the mansion's lower halls. The man was taller than Maria, with a lean build, his face obscured by the low light, but his presence was undeniable, a silent partner in Maria's escalating scheme, a physical manifestation of the threat against his children. With every piece of evidence, every chilling discovery, Elias felt the net tightening around Maria and her accomplice. He had gathered the footage, the diary entries, the medical reports detailing Leo's mysterious rashes and Lily's unexplained bruises. He had meticulously documented the financial discrepancies in his wife's aunt's will, tracing the stolen funds to the offshore account Maria had opened. The picture was complete, a tapestry woven with deceit, greed, and unspeakable cruelty. Elias knew the time for passive observation was over. He made a series of discreet phone calls, not to the local police, not yet, but to a trusted, high-powered legal team, known for their unwavering dedication to justice, especially in cases involving the vulnerable. He also reached out to a private investigator, a former colleague from his security days, to help secure the mansion and gather any final, crucial details about Maria's accomplice, ensuring that when he finally moved, it would be with the full force of truth and an unyielding certainty, ready to dismantle Maria's dark empire and reclaim his family's future. The private investigator, a man named Marcus, who moved with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned hunter, delivered his findings with a grim, almost apologetic tone. Elias sat in his study, the room's opulent comfort a stark contrast to the chilling details Marcus unveiled. The accomplice, indeed, was a man named Victor Moreau, a distant, estranged cousin of Maria's, with a history as murky as the depths of the ocean. Victor was a drifter, a man of shadowy enterprises, known for his charismatic deception and a penchant for exploiting the vulnerable. He had a record of minor fraud and embezzlement, always managing to slip through the cracks of the law, leaving a trail of ruined lives in his wake. His connection to Maria was deeper than mere familial ties. They shared a twisted ambition, a mutual resentment for their perceived lot in life, and a burning desire for wealth they felt entitled to. Maria, it turned out, harbored a long-standing, bitter grudge against Elias's wife's family, believing her own ancestors had been unjustly disinherited from a portion of the family fortune generations ago. Victor, seeing an opportunity to capitalize on Maria's deep-seated resentment and Elias's grief-induced vulnerability, had become the architect of their elaborate scheme, whispering promises of a grand inheritance and a life of luxury into Maria's ear. Fueling her already festering bitterness, the revelations solidified Elias's understanding of the cold, calculated nature of their plot. This was not merely about money. It was about a deeply ingrained sense of injustice, twisted into a predatory quest for power and control. Maria's manipulations of the children, her attempts to poison their minds against him, were not just acts of cruelty, but strategic moves to isolate them, to make them dependent solely on her, paving the way for her and Victor to step in as their legal guardians, to seize control of the Thorne Empire. The thought of Victor Moreau, a man of such ill repute having any influence over Lily and Leo, sent a fresh wave of icy dread through Elias, quickly followed by a searing, unyielding rage. He looked at the photographs Marcus had provided, Victor's smirking face, Maria's rigid features in an old family portrait. The pieces of the puzzle now fit together with terrifying precision, forming a complete, undeniable picture of betrayal. Maria, increasingly aware of Elias's watchful gaze, began to unravel. Her once meticulous composure frayed at the edges, replaced by a brittle anxiety that manifested in sudden outbursts and thinly veiled threats. She would snap at Lily for the slightest infraction, her voice sharp and unforgiving, her eyes darting towards Elias as if daring him to intervene. She became possessive of the children, physically interposing herself between them and Elias, attempting to block his access, to control their interactions. One afternoon, Elias found Lily crying silently in her room, clutching her favorite doll. When he asked what was wrong, Lily, her voice barely a whisper, confessed that Maria had told her that if she ever told Papa about Maria's special games, Maria would send her and Leo away to a place where Papa would never find them, a place where no one would ever love them. The words, delivered with such chilling conviction, were a testament to Maria's psychological torment, designed to sever the children's last thread of hope and connection to their father. Elias held Lily close, his heart aching with a pain so profound it threatened to suffocate him. He looked into her tear-filled eyes, seeing the terror and confusion that Maria had so cruelly inflicted. His voice, though gentle, carried an unshakable promise. "No one will ever take you or Leo away from me. My darling, never. Papa will protect you." He spent the rest of the day with his children. Their laughter, once so rare, now beginning to echo softly through the mansion's grand halls. He played with Lily's dollhouse, built towering block castles with Leo, and read stories until his voice grew hoarse. He was rebuilding their trust, brick by agonizing brick, dismantling Maria's carefully constructed wall of fear with every gentle touch, every loving word. He saw the children slowly re-emerge from the shadows, their spirits, though still fragile, beginning to mend under the unwavering warmth of his renewed affection. Maria, observing these moments from a distance, her face a mask of simmering resentment, felt her control slipping, her carefully laid plans crumbling before her eyes. The children, once so compliant, now clung to Elias, their fear of her slowly being replaced by a burgeoning trust in their father. She saw the evidence of her eroding power in Lily's defiant glance, in Leo's insistent cries for Elias's arms, not hers. Her desperation escalated, pushing her to take increasingly reckless risks. Elias, ever vigilant, noticed a strange, bitter taste in his morning coffee, a subtle alteration in the children's bedtime tea. He discreetly collected samples, sending them to a private lab, his suspicions growing heavier with each passing day. He knew Maria was capable of anything, and her desperation was a dangerous, unpredictable force. The private investigator's final report arrived, a thick dossier filled with irrefutable evidence: Maria's forged documents, her offshore accounts, Victor Moreau's criminal history, and their shared, elaborate plan to usurp the Thorne estate. It even included a detailed timeline of their communication, revealing a sinister plot that had been meticulously crafted over months, preying on Elias's grief and the children's vulnerability. The report confirmed that Maria and Victor intended to stage an incident, making it appear as though Elias was an unfit parent, prone to neglecting his children, using the children's manufactured distress and Maria's fabricated stories as leverage to gain full custody and control of the estate. The mention of casting out the children from Elias's life, making them disappear into a system under their control, sent a shiver down Elias's spine. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and incontrovertible. Elias held the weight of it in his hands, a powerful weapon of truth ready to be unleashed. He knew the time for waiting was over. The battle for his children's future, for their very souls, was about to begin. Elias Thorne moved with a newfound purpose, a steely resolve that had replaced the grief-stricken haze. The dossier, heavy with the weight of truth, lay on his desk, its pages filled with the meticulous details of Maria's and Victor Moreau's vile scheme. He knew he could not simply hand over the evidence. He needed to catch them in the act, to ensure there was no room for doubt, no escape for their calculated cruelty. He decided to orchestrate a scenario, a trap designed to expose their true intentions to the world, and most importantly, to his children, who deserved to see the justice they had been denied for so long. He arranged a fictional business trip, making a show of packing his bags, instructing Maria to ensure the children were well cared for in his absence, his voice carefully devoid of any suspicion. a performance honed by years of high-stakes negotiations. He even had his private jet prepared, its engines roaring as it taxied down the runway, a convincing illusion of his departure. But Elias did not leave. Instead, he returned to the mansion through a discreet service entrance, his presence a silent shadow in the vast house. He positioned himself in a hidden alcove overlooking the main living area, monitoring the hidden cameras, his heart a drum against his ribs. He knew Maria and Victor would seize this perceived opportunity, believing the mansion to be theirs for the taking. The hours stretched, each tick of the grandfather clock an agonizing wait, until finally, as dusk painted the sky in hues of deep violet and orange, Victor Moreau's dark, sleek car pulled up the winding driveway. Elias watched, his jaw clenched, as Victor, a man whose face he now knew intimately from Marcus's photographs, entered the house with a chilling familiarity, as if it were his own. Maria, the housekeeper, laughed with cruel disdain. "These children are mine now." Elias Thorne, returning unexpectedly, saw his daughter's tear-filled eyes. What he heard next from her fragile voice froze the blood in his veins forever. The grand echoing halls of the Thorne estate, usually hushed in Elias's absence, now thrummed with an unsettling tension. Elias Thorne, a titan of industry whose name commanded respect in boardrooms across the globe, stepped through the imposing oak doors, the weight of his travel weariness suddenly replaced by an icy premonition. He had cut his business trip short, an inexplicable unease gnawing at him, a whisper of parental instinct that defied logic. The mansion, a sprawling monument to his success, felt unusually cold, the silence between Maria's raised voice and a child's muffled sob far more chilling than any emptiness. His heart, long accustomed to the quiet ache left by his beloved wife's departure during childbirth, now beat with a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm. He had been away for only a week, a necessary evil for the empire he was building, an empire he believed would secure his children's future. But the air felt thick with a presence he could not quite place, a shadow that had crept into the corners of his once sacred home. He moved silently through the meticulously decorated foyer, his expensive shoes making no sound on the polished marble. The scent of disinfectant, usually a mark of Maria's diligent care, now seemed to cling to the air with an almost suffocating quality, masking other, more subtle odors he couldn't quite identify. The mansion, designed for comfort and grandeur, now felt like a labyrinth of secrets, each turn leading him closer to an unknown dread. His gaze fell upon a small, brightly colored toy train, abandoned on the floor near the nursery door, its vibrant red contrasting sharply with the somber quiet. A faint, desperate whimper led him to Lily's room, a sound that pierced through the carefully constructed walls of his emotional detachment, stirring a primal fear he hadn't known since the moment he held his newborn son for the first time, a son whose tiny cries had been the only sounds of life in the silent aftermath of his wife's passing. The door to Lily's bedroom, usually left ajar, was now firmly shut, a subtle but alarming deviation from the routine. He paused, his hand hovering over the cold brass knob, listening. Maria's voice, usually soft and deferential, was now sharp, laced with an unfamiliar edge, a tone that sent shivers down his spine. He heard Lily's voice, small and tremulous, pleading, "Please, Maria, don't. Papa will be home soon. He'll protect me." The words were a fragile shield against an unseen torment, a desperate cry for a protector who, until this very moment, had been an ocean away, consumed by the demands of his empire. Elias's jaw tightened, a cold fury beginning to simmer beneath his calm exterior. His children, Lily, barely 6 years old with eyes like her mother's, and little Leo, still a baby, were his world, even if his grief had kept him from fully embracing it. The thought of them in distress, of Lily's innocent plea, ignited a spark of protective fire he hadn't felt in years, a fire that had been dormant since the day he lost the love of his life. Maria, the housekeeper, had seemed a godsend in the chaotic aftermath of his wife's passing. She had arrived at his doorstep like an answer to a silent prayer, a woman in her late 40s, with a stern yet reassuring demeanor, her hands always busy, her words always respectful. She had presented herself as an experienced caregiver, a widow herself, understanding of loss and dedicated to nurturing young lives. Elias, adrift in a sea of sorrow and overwhelmed by the demands of his business and 2 young children, had welcomed her into his home and his life with a desperate gratitude. She had quickly taken charge, organizing the household, tending to the children with what appeared to be unwavering devotion, allowing Elias to retreat into his work, a safe haven from the crushing weight of his personal loss. He had seen her as a pillar of strength, a maternal figure for his motherless children, a woman who understood the silent language of grief and the delicate needs of a grieving family. He had been too consumed by his own emptiness, by the gaping void left by his wife's departure, to see beyond the facade, to truly scrutinize the subtle shifts in her gaze, the fleeting shadows that sometimes crossed her features. He had blindly trusted her with the most precious parts of his life, his children, believing her dedication was born of genuine care, not a calculated, insidious ambition. A cold dread gripped Elias as he pushed open Lily's door, the sound of the latch clicking softly in the sudden jarring silence. Maria stood over Lily, a half-empty glass of milk in her hand, her expression one of stern authority that instantly softened into a practiced, saccharine smile upon seeing Elias. Lily, her small frame trembling, was huddled on her bed, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored the terror Elias had heard in her voice, a fear that Maria's sudden pleasant demeanor could not entirely mask. Little Leo, in his crib in the corner, stirred uneasily, a faint whimper escaping his lips as if sensing the unspoken tension that had just flooded the room. The air was thick with the cloying scent of stale milk and something else, something sharp and metallic that Elias couldn't quite place, a subtle discord in the meticulously maintained order Maria usually presented. He felt a jolt, a visceral understanding that the peace he had believed in was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. Maria's voice, now dripping with feigned concern, addressed Elias. "Oh, Mr. Thorne, you're back so soon. What a lovely surprise. Lily here was just being a little difficult about her milk, but we were almost done." She gestured towards the glass with a dismissive wave, her eyes darting quickly from Elias to Lily, a silent warning passing between them that only a child's terrified gaze could truly decipher. Elias's gaze, however, was fixed on Lily's small wrist, where a faint reddish mark bloomed like an ugly bruise just beneath the cuff of her sleeve. It was a fleeting glimpse, quickly hidden as Lily instinctively pulled her hand away, but it was enough. The sight ignited a slow-burning fuse within Elias, a realization that the gentle, devoted caregiver he had trusted was a cruel stranger lurking beneath a benevolent mask. His heart ached with a profound guilt, a heavy weight settling in his chest, as he considered how many such moments he had missed, how many silent pleas had gone unheard while he buried himself in the sterile comfort of his work. He knelt beside Lily, his voice soft, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within him. "Hello, my sweet girl. Papa's home." Lily threw herself into his arms, her small body shaking with suppressed sobs, burying her face into his shoulder. She clung to him with a desperation that spoke volumes, a silent testament to the fear she had been enduring. Maria watched them, her smile fixed, but her eyes held a glint of something cold and calculating, a flicker of resentment that betrayed her carefully crafted facade. Elias felt Leo's restless stirring in the crib, and he reached out, touching the baby's cheek. Leo's skin felt unusually warm, and a faint angry rash dotted his tiny arm, another detail that Maria had conveniently overlooked or dismissed. The subtle signs once invisible to Elias's grief-clouded eyes were now screaming at him, demanding his attention, painting a disturbing picture of neglect and something far more sinister. Over the next few days, Elias moved through the mansion like a phantom, observing, listening, piecing together the fragments of truth that had been hidden in plain sight. He noticed Lily flinching whenever Maria moved too quickly, the way her eyes would dart away when Maria spoke, the unnatural quiet that fell over the children when Maria was near. Leo's cries, once dismissed as typical baby fussiness, now seemed to carry an undertone of genuine distress, especially when Maria was the one attending to him. Doors to the children's rooms were often found locked from the outside, a detail Maria explained away as a safety measure to prevent the children from wandering at night. But Elias knew deep in his gut that it was a cage, a way to isolate them, to control them, to silence their cries. He began to find small, unsettling clues. A child's drawing of a scary figure with Maria's distinctive bun hidden beneath Lily's mattress. A torn page from a storybook with the words "Papa will save me" scribbled in crayon. The way Maria would subtly block his view of the children, always interposing herself between them and him, controlling the narrative of their interactions.